I'd owned the house long enough to memorize every creaking floorboard, every knot in the cellar beams, every spiderweb that gathered in corners when I forgot to sweep. 5 years doesn't sound like much, but in that time, a place stops being four walls and becomes muscle memory. You navigate it by reflex, not thought. On Saturday mornings, I had a ritual: coffee in one hand, an old radio in the other. I'd head down to the basement to sort through whatever clutter the week produced. The light down there was always dim, filtered through a single grimy window, and the air smelled faintly of earth and old varnish. I usually rotated the storage shelves, wiped away dust, made sure no dampness had crept in. Nothing ever surprised me, until that afternoon. I was shifting a heavy oak bookcase I'd inherited from my grandfather. It was the kind of solid furniture that took 2 people to move, so I rocked it gently back and forth, inch by inch, until I could slide it a foot to the left. As soon as its weight lifted off the concrete, something scraped behind it metal. On stone, at first I figured a nail had fallen loose. I crouched to pick it up, but saw only darkness. Curious, I wrestled the entire case a bit farther, enough to reveal the wall behind it, and felt the cold prickle of air that doesn't belong. Indoors, there, where I'd always assumed was only concrete foundation, stood a narrow metal door steel, dull with rust, its edges mottled like old blood. It was about 5 feet high, almost child-sized, wedged between 2 joists, as if someone had tried to hide it rather than install it. I stepped back, confusion eclipsing the ache in my shoulders. That wall had been solid when I moved in. I was certain I'd stored boxes flush against it many times. I knelt, brushing away dust, and saw that the frame had been mortared poorly. The cement smeared over rough brick, as though someone had rushed the job. The door had no knob. Instead, in the center, rivets ringed a flat steel plate. Deep vertical scratches marred both sides of the frame, some long, others in short gouges, all angling outward. They looked disturbingly like claw marks. I pressed my ear to the metal. The chills seeped straight through my skin. No sound came, just a faint echo of my own breathing in the hollow space beyond. Disbelief pushed me to fetch the original house, plans stashed in my filing cabinet. When I unrolled them across the kitchen table, sweat prickled under my collar despite the autumn chill. The basement layout showed nothing where that door sat only foundation wall. No sealed storage, no maintenance crawl space, nothing. I called the previous owner, a widower named Harris, who sold me the place when he downsized. He answered with the groggy confusion of someone disturbed from an afternoon nap. I asked him, carefully, if he ever knew of a door behind the shelves. He paused for a long time. "There's no door down there," he said finally, voice brittle. When I explained what I'd found, he muttered something about remembering to take his pills and hung up. That night, every normal sound of the house felt wrong. Floorboards popped under settling beams. The furnace kicked on with its usual low hum, yet each noise seemed amplified, carrying an undercurrent of tension that set my teeth on edge. I lay awake replaying the discovery until the clock showed 3:07 a.m. around that time. A faint rattle drifted up through the vent's metal, vibrating in short bursts. I told myself it was the ductwork cooling. Still, I couldn't shake the image of those scratches at dawn. I made stronger coffee than usual and forced myself downstairs again. In the daylight sneaking through the window, the mysterious door looked even older, orange rust crusting the lower hinge. I reached out and pressed the center plate. It didn't budge. I knocked lightly. The vibration felt hollow, as if the space behind it was deeper than the thickness of a wall. Instinct warned me to leave it alone, but logic, curiosity, whatever stubborn impulse I have that urged me to solve the riddle. I fetched my toolbox, selected a flathead screwdriver, and wedged it under the edge of the plate. The tool slipped, clanging loudly, echoing through the basement. I tried again, harder, but the plate might as well have been welded in. I stepped back, breathing faster, frustration mixing with a sudden smell damp, earth and something coppery, like pennies left in water. I spent the next hour documenting everything, snapping photos, measuring the door's dimensions, noting every scratch and rivet. I texted the images to a contractor friend, asking if he'd ever seen such a thing retrofitted into a basement. He replied 2 hours later, not without cutting through main supports. Looks dangerous and pointless. Are you sure those pics aren't edited? His skepticism only deepened my unease. I sent one more close-up of the claw marks. He didn't respond after that. By evening, an oppressive silence filled the downstairs rooms, as though the house itself was holding breath. I couldn't focus on dinner, couldn't read, couldn't do anything but replay each detail in my mind. The door hadn't been there for 5 years, yet now it stood etched with desperate scratches, mocking my memory. As dusk settled, I stopped at the top of the basement stairs and listened. Somewhere below, barely audible, something scraped gently against metal. Slow, rhythmic stroke, like nails testing the strength of steel. My pulse hammered so loudly I nearly turned back, but I forced myself 3 steps down, flashlight in hand. The scraping ceased. A breath of cold air flowed up the stairwell, carrying with it the faintest whisper of movement from behind that impossible door. I held the light steady, waiting for another sound that never came, and in that tense silence the reality of my discovery settled over me like a weight I could neither shoulder nor shed. The door in the basement had no handle, no keyhole, no welcome, just deep, jagged scratches around its rusted frame. They weren't the accidental kind you'd expect from moving furniture or careless tools. These marks were desperate, violent. They carved into the metal as though something inside had tried again and again to break free, only to be denied each time. When I first saw them, my hands stopped just short of touching the surface. My fingers hovered there, inches from the cold steel, afraid that if I made contact, something on the other side would feel it too. I told myself I was overreacting, that maybe they were just remnants from a previous owner kids playing a prank, or some old forgotten project. But the more I stared, the less it made sense. The scratches were uneven, like someone had clawed at the door over time. Some were fresh, with tiny flakes of rust crumbling at the edges, while others had dulled with age. I backed away slowly, feeling the concrete floor beneath my feet grow colder. That door wasn't supposed to be there, and whatever had been near it, scratching and clawing, had left its mark for a reason. That night, the house didn't feel the same. I lived alone, yet it seemed like every wall was listening. The wooden floors that usually creaked only when I walked now groaned under invisible weight. The windows clicked as if tapped from outside, though there was no wind. Most of all, it was the basement I couldn't stop thinking about. I hadn't even opened the door, and yet it had already started to affect my world. I went to bed early, hoping that sleep would settle the unease twisting in my stomach. But as I lay there, the house settled around me in strange ways. I heard the usual groans of old pipes, but they were joined by faint, irregular thuds, like something tapping from below. It wasn't rhythmic like a leak or heater. It was deliberate. 2 slow knocks, silence, then a third, softer one. The noise was too far beneath the floor to be anything in the main part of the house. My bedroom was directly above the basement, and I felt it then. That realization hit like ice. The sound was coming from the direction of the hidden door. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was the heater kicking on, or the water heater shifting. But logic didn't hold up to the growing fear that something wanted me to hear it. Something that had been trying to get out. The next day, I avoided the basement. I made coffee and worked from my living room, doing everything I could to ignore the idea that the door was still down there. But by early evening, I couldn't help myself. I had to check. With a flashlight in hand, I descended the stairs and paused halfway. The basement smelled different. The musty, familiar odor of dust and wood had been replaced with something heavier, like wet soil and rusting iron. The moment I stepped onto the concrete floor, my ears tuned into everything. No knocking, no whispers, just silence. I approached the hidden corner behind the shelves, my flashlight beam slicing through the dimness. The door stood exactly where it had been, but something about it had changed. The scratches were deeper. The rust had flaked more. A tiny pile of reddish dust had gathered on the floor beneath the frame, and new marks dinner, more frenzied spider-webbed outward, like someone had used their fingernails. I leaned closer, flashlight aimed at the edges. That's when I noticed a smear just beside the bottom hinge. It looked like a handprint. Faint, but unmistakable. 4 fingers and a palm dragged downward, as if something had tried to pull itself up the door, or pull itself out. My skin crawled. The rest of the evening I spent upstairs, trying to forget it. I kept the TV on, even though I wasn't watching it, just to drown out any sounds the house might make. I turned every light on, even in rooms I wasn't using. When the sun finally set, the basement seemed darker than usual, like the shadows down there had thickened and were reaching for the top of the stairs. At 3:14 a.m., I awoke without knowing why. The house was dead silent. No traffic outside, no wind, just silence. Then I heard it again. A thud, deeper than the last time, followed by another. Then scratching long, slow, like nails dragging across metal. It stopped. I held my breath, ears straining. A minute passed. Then a voice. It wasn't loud, it wasn't clear, but I heard it. A soft whisper, muffled as though spoken through thick steel. I couldn't make out the words, but I knew it was calling, whispering just loud, enough for me to know it was real. My chest tightened. I couldn't move. I stared at my ceiling, trying not to blink, as though blinking would let it get closer. Morning came, but sleep never did. I haven't been in the basement since, but sometimes, even during the day, I swear I hear movement down there, scraping, like someone pacing slowly behind a locked door. I still don't know how the door got there. I don't know what those scratches mean, but every night, when the sounds begin again, I wonder how much longer that door can hold. I decided to record the sounds coming from the basement, partly to prove I wasn't losing my mind, and partly because no one I told seemed to believe me. I set up my phone's voice recorder one night, placed it just above the basement steps, and let it run while I locked myself in my bedroom upstairs. Every creak in the house had started to feel like something watching, something breathing in sync with my every move. My sleep had been light, anxious, interrupted constantly by faint thuds or something softer like the drag of skin across the floor. But nothing had prepared me for what I heard the next morning when I played back the recording. It started as silence. The house was quiet, as always. Then, about 45 minutes in, the recorder picked up the first sound, a soft knock, barely audible, like knuckles against metal. It came in 3 slow taps, then nothing. But 5 minutes later, there was a scraping noise, a long, deliberate sound, like someone running fingernails slowly across the basement wall. I turned the volume up, leaning closer. The scraping stopped, and the silence that followed was even worse. Then came the whisper. It wasn't clear at first, a soft hissing sound. I replayed it multiple times, adjusting the levels. When I isolated the whisper, my heart froze. It was saying my name, slowly, deliberately, almost like a question. The voice wasn't one I recognized. It was low, raspy, almost childlike, but twisted somehow, like it had forgotten how to speak and was relearning through me. My name, repeated twice, followed by something I couldn't decipher. I played it again and again. Each time, the whisper seemed to grow colder. It was like hearing my own death sentence being spoken from inside my walls. I dropped the phone in panic, but the horror didn't stop there. I reviewed the rest of the recording, hands trembling, unsure whether I wanted to know what else had happened while I slept. 30 minutes later, in the recording, more footsteps. This time not from within the basement, but across the floor directly beneath the recorder, as if something had climbed out and was standing right at the top of the basement stairs. The footsteps were light but deliberate. One step, pause, another. Step, then breathing, not my breathing. This one was slow, wet, irregular, like lungs filled with fluid, struggling to inhale. The sound continued for nearly 3 minutes. I sat frozen on the couch, phone still in hand, trying to understand. What could make a sound like that? Then there was a thud, like something heavy had hit the base of the recorder stand. The phone must have shaken slightly, because the recording rustled before going silent again. I didn't hear anything for the next hour of playback. By the time I finished listening, the sun had risen outside. The light didn't bring comfort. If anything, it made the darkness at the bottom of the basement stairs feel even deeper. I crept toward the top step and stared into the shadows below, phone still playing on loop. I couldn't explain it. There were no animals in the house, no vents that would produce whispers. I didn't sleepwalk, and no one had access to my home. Still, something had spoken my name in the middle of the night, and it hadn't been a dream. I didn't go to work that day. Instead, I moved every single piece of furniture away from the basement door. I placed a chair against the handle even, though the door didn't have a knob and stacked heavy. Boxers in front of the shelf that hid the strange metal door in the basement. I needed barriers, even symbolic ones, to pretend I had some control. But fear doesn't respect furniture, and dread can seep through any wall, especially when you've heard it breathing your name. That night, I tried to ignore the noises. I left the recorder off, telling myself it was better not to know. But ignorance doesn't protect you. Around 2:50 a.m., I woke to the sound of my bedroom door creaking. I bolted upright. The door hadn't moved. It was locked, as always, but I could hear something just outside. Breathing, that same irregular inhale and exhale, growing louder with every second. I held my breath, waiting for it to stop. It didn't. For 5 full minutes, it hovered outside my door. Then silence. In the morning, I checked the recorder again, half hoping nothing had been captured. I had left it near the door this time. What I heard chilled me more than the whisper. At exactly 2:49 a.m., there was a faint click, the sound of something testing the lock on my door. Then, softly, the voice returned. It said my name once, and then laughed. It wasn't a human laugh. It was dry, broken, full of static, a rasping exhale pretending to be joy. The laugh grew distorted, like it was being pulled through a wire too narrow to carry emotion. I turned off the recording and sat in silence. It had started with whispers. Now it was coming closer, night after night. Whatever lived behind that basement door knew who I was, and now it knew exactly where I slept. One night, as the rain tapped relentlessly against the windows and thunder rumbled far in the distance, I went down to the basement to grab something from the storage shelf. I hadn't gone near the door in days. I'd tried to ignore it, cover it with furniture, pretend it wasn't there. But something felt off that night, like a weight was pulling me toward it. When I stepped onto the basement floor, I immediately noticed something was wrong. The air was damp, colder than usual, and the silence was unnatural, as if the house itself was holding its breath. I turned on the light and froze. The heavy boxes I had stacked in front of the hidden metal door were no longer where I left them. They were pushed to the side neatly, not toppled, not disturbed like an accident. They had been moved intentionally, like someone or something wanted me to see what was behind them. My eyes were immediately drawn to the door. It was slightly open, just a crack, but enough to know that it was no longer sealed like it had been. I hadn't opened it. I hadn't even touched it. Yet now, something had moved it from the inside. My heart pounded. The flashlight in my hand shook slightly. I felt like I was standing at the edge of a cliff, with something vast and black staring back at me from the void. I didn't want to go closer, but I couldn't stop myself. I slowly walked to the door, footsteps echoing on the concrete floor. As I got within a foot, I noticed muddy footprints leading away from the door. Not boot prints, not shoes, bare feet. The impressions were wide but twisted, like toes longer than normal. They trailed into the basement and disappeared halfway across the floor, fading like someone or something had simply stopped existing mid-step. I followed them to where they ended. There was nothing, just clean concrete after that. No more mud, no more marks. I walked in circles trying to make sense of it, but there was no explanation. Something had come through that door, walked halfway across the room, and then vanished. Not even the dust had been disturbed beyond that point. I turned back to the door and felt a wave of dread crash over me. The scratch marks along its edge looked deeper now, more chaotic. There were new ones, 2 tiny grooves etched into the frame just inside the door, like something with thin claws had crawled out and braced itself as it emerged. The inside of the door was darker, coated in some kind of black grime that smelled of metal and mold. I knelt, shining my light inside, trying to see where it led. But the space beyond wasn't a room, it was a tunnel. Narrow and low, almost like a crawl space, and it stretched into blackness. I reached out instinctively, though every nerve in my body screamed at me to stop. My fingers touched the inside wall. It was damp, textured like rotting wood. Something brushed against my hand. I jerked back, stumbling onto the floor. There was no sound, but I knew I wasn't alone. I slammed the door shut with all my strength and pushed the shelves back in front of it. I ran upstairs, double-locked the basement door, and sat on the couch, heart hammering in my chest. The rest of the house was quiet, too quiet. I turned on every light, just to feel less alone. Hours passed. I tried to convince myself that what I saw wasn't real, that my mind had created it out of fear. But fear doesn't leave footprints. Fear doesn't open heavy steel doors and crawl through forgotten tunnels. At 2:11 a.m., I heard something from the kitchen. A single knock, not at the front door, not at the windows, from inside the house. I tiptoed toward the sound and froze again. The back door, the one that led into the yard, was wide open. I always locked it before bed. I approached it slowly, heart pounding so loud I could barely hear myself breathe. Just outside on the deck were two more muddy footprints, bare, identical to the ones in the basement, but they were facing the house, not away from it. Whatever had left them had come back. I slammed the door shut, locked it, and ran to my bedroom. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. I kept the lights on and stared at the door, waiting. Every creak in the house became a warning. Every shadow felt like it was stretching just a little too far. Something had come out of that door in the basement. Something had walked halfway across the floor and disappeared. And now it was somewhere in the house, watching, waiting. And every night since, I've wondered if it's already found a way into the walls, or worse, into me. After weeks of enduring strange noises, whispered voices, and terrifying dreams, I decided to install a motion-activated camera outside the basement door. It was a desperate move, but I needed proof that I wasn't going insane. I wanted to catch whatever was happening in the act, to see with my own eyes what I had only heard or imagined. I set up the camera with night vision, angled directly at the corner where the hidden metal door stood behind the shelves. I pressed record and walked away, dreading what it might capture more than I dreaded another sleepless night. That night was the first in a long time where the house felt still. No knocking, no breathing, no distant footsteps. But that calm made me even more nervous. It was the kind of silence that comes before something breaks. I stayed up in bed with my laptop, refreshing the camera feed every half hour. Nothing changed. The shelves stayed in place. The basement door remained shut. I began to think maybe whatever had come through, it was finally gone, or worse, maybe it never existed and I had imagined the entire thing. But at 3:07 a.m., the camera froze. It wasn't a glitch in my internet or a software error. The footage turned black for exactly 22 seconds, then resumed as if nothing had happened. But when it came back, the shelves had moved. Not far, just an inch or two to the left, like something had nudged them aside just enough to show it could. I stared at the screen, heart pounding. I rewound the footage, hoping I could find a frame that showed something. But the blackness swallowed everything. No shapes, no figures, just darkness. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. The next morning, I retrieved the memory card from the camera and loaded the footage into editing software, hoping to brighten it, enhance shadows, anything that could give me a clue. When I adjusted the contrast and slowed it down frame by frame, I noticed something terrifying. In one frame just one right before the blackout, a hand could be seen reaching toward the lens. Not a human hand. It was too long, too bony, the skin stretched tight like wax over sticks. Its fingers were pointed, sharp at the tips, and its wrist bent at an unnatural angle. Then came the black screen, and after that, the hand was gone. I didn't show anyone the footage. I knew no one would believe it. I barely believed it myself. But the more I watched it, the more I realized it had seen the camera. It had reached for it, not like it was curious, but like it was aware of being watched and wanted to stop it. That realization chilled me more than the image itself. It wasn't just wandering through the house. It knew me. It was aware of me, tracking my actions, responding to what I did. It was intelligent. Over the next few days, things escalated. The dreams became more vivid. I would wake up to the sound of scratching on the inside of the walls, sometimes directly. Beside my bed, I would hear my name whispered, not from below, but from behind my headboard, as if something had crawled through the wall and was inches away from where I slept. My phone would turn on by itself, and in the camera roll, I would find blurry black photos I didn't remember taking. In one of them, I could see what looked like the outline of a face reflected in the glass of a window behind me. I tried leaving the house, but the dread followed me. Even when I stayed in hotels or with friends, the dreams persisted. Once, in a motel room 2 towns over, I woke up to find muddy footprints on the carpet leading from the door to the foot of the bed. I hadn't tracked anything in. No one had a key, yet the prints were there, proof that it could follow me wherever I went. I realized then that the basement door had only been the beginning. It wasn't about the house, it was about me. I returned home because I didn't know what else to do. I boarded up the basement. I sealed the door. I got rid of the camera, but nothing helped. That night, I fell asleep from exhaustion, and at 3:13 a.m., I awoke to the sound of something breathing right beside me. I didn't move. I didn't open my eyes, but I felt its cold, ragged breath against my neck. The presence didn't speak. It didn't touch me. It just stood there for what felt like an hour. Then the breathing stopped, and I knew it had left. I don't sleep in that room anymore. I moved everything into the living room and keep all the lights on. But sometimes, when I pass by the hallway or glance into a dark corner, I feel watched. Not the kind of watching that comes from curiosity, but the kind that comes from something waiting. I know now that whatever came through that basement door didn't leave. It didn't vanish into the walls. It found its way into my life, and no matter where I go, it will always know how to find me.